how do you fight a faction with an incredible cavalry advantage? And the answer is very carefully. This enemy faction, which happens to be Parthia in this game, commanded by Agni Van Isun, I hope I pronunciated that right, is rather impressive if you look at the cavalry. He has a unit of Royal Cataphracts for the general. He has 3 Eastern Cataphracts and 2 lighter cavalry units, which aren't very important if I'm completely honest. I believe it's a camel and something else. Along with this, he has an impressive array of peltists. These mercenary peltists are actually rather good. And he actually does not have a bad infantry contingent with 4 Persian hoplites and 4 Parthian swordsmen. If we take a look at my army, I have 6 Eastern Slingers, which is quite a lot if I'm honest, 4 Thorax Pikemen, 3 Levy Pikemen, and I actually have a pretty impressive array of cavalry myself with 4 Bactrian Noble Horse Cavalry and a Bactrian Royal Cavalry unit, which is the shock cavalry as opposed to the melee cavalry. Along with this, here is the Pilas Restance, or however you say that word. I'm not fancy, I'm American. I have 2 horse skirmishers, and if you're going to play against a faction with elephants, which Parthia has, or even better on a forested map, which this is, as you can see, an incredibly nice forest in my opinion. I do judge forests for a living. I suggest you bring light cavalry like horse skirmishers, especially if you're playing an eastern faction like Bartia, or any faction with horse skirmishers. You should really consider bringing these units. These two of these guys is actually a very big problem for an enemy faction. And I am just going to use these 2 units as a light cavalry contingent to keep an eye on this guy's movements and harass him for the entire game. And these guys actually do rather respectable damage. But even if they weren't doing any damage at all, this is actually very important for understanding the movements of my opponent. Because, quite simply, if I didn't have these units here, this entire army would not be visible to me. If we look at my army, my entire force is invisible to the Parthian army. He doesn't actually know where I am at this point in time, and all he has to really chase are these horse skirmishers, which isn't going to help him in the long run of the battle. I'm not going to depend on these horse skirmishers to win the battle, but he's going to depend on his cavalry. And if I can harass this enemy cavalry and weaken it in any way that I can, I will actually have a really large advantage at this point. Now this battle, I'm going to tell you up front, takes close to the full 20-minute time limit allotted. So I'm just going to speed it up for a while. And as you can see, we just go into a cycle of me skirmishing him, getting close. These are my horse skirmishers. Throwing a couple spears or javelins into units that are important to him. These Parthian swordsmen are important to him. And he's going to start losing men. And he's going to try to chase the way with cavalry. He's going to go back as I start to run away. And we just rinse and repeat this cycle. Meanwhile, I'm just sitting over here and I don't have to move anywhere. What you have to understand is that if you're in a situation like this where your opponent has great amounts of cavalry and is waiting in a forest, you shouldn't actually just run and try to engage him. If you have something to annoy him with, like these horse skirmishers, then I don't see the point of actually running towards him and losing a cav engagement or getting into a big fight. Passively playing this game in Rome 2 is what, in my opinion, you should do if you have an army like mine fighting an army like this. because these Eastern Cataphracts can eat pikemen alive. And I'm going to take a lot of, Cataphracts out. It doesn't look like much, but taking off, 10, 8, 9 units, individual Cataphracts from a unit is actually a very big deal for weakening these Cav Force. And as you can see, if I wouldn't have had my horse skirmishers running around back here, I would have had no idea where this guy was exactly. I would have had an idea, but I wouldn't have actual, an idea of what his army composition was. I wouldn't have any of this information if I had not had these horse skirmishers. What's more is that horse skirmishers are great for dealing with elephants, which is pretty spiffy. Anyway, I'm finally going to start edging my way up, and I want to engage this guy with a skirmish fight. I do not want to get engaged with the infantry yet, because I'll lose. Because all he needs to do is tie down my pikes and then hammer and anvil them, and I'll be screwed. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start positioning myself right here, right along this area, and trying to get him out of these trees so I can fight him on ground that I can fight on. Because all I need to do is start a skirmish war, and he'll start to either attack me or back off. So if we fast forward it again, because this is going to take a while, nothing's really happening at this point. We're just both trying to set up. Varenison is trying to set up his army, and he was trying to go around on my flank. And because of my horse skirmishers, which again are really units that put in a lot of work in this battle, I love these units, I'm going to be able to predict his movements and just position my pike army accordingly, which is a big deal. As you can see, he's just going to try to run and run and run and run into a place and lure me into these trees, which is something you cannot fall for against a Parthian army like his. Because while trees do slow down units, I don't actually think they reduce the effectiveness of cavalry like they did in Shogun 2, which is why I'm avoiding conflict, because I don't want to get caught with these cavalry in the trees or not in the trees. So fast forwarding it again, we're just running around. I'm trying to lure him into engagement, but this player is smart and does not engage me over here, or else I would have just started to eat away at those two cataphracting units. Now he will make a mistake eventually, and this is what you need to wait for. You need to wait for your opponent to make either a mistake or you see or make an opening. If your opponent makes a mistake and if you see that as an opening, take it. Otherwise, you're going to have to create an opening for yourself. Fortunately, my Parthian player, while good and cautious, does make a fairly decently sized mistake. He actually makes a couple mistakes, and we'll go through those as we reach them. However, I'm finally going to start to engage with these Eastern Slingers, which are great skirmish units, and they're finally going to be able to shoot off. And I am also leaving a little bit of cheese out here in the forms of this horse skirmisher unit. I'm hoping to tempt him into sending some cavalry after them, so they can be pretty much eaten alive by my slingers. And I believe he does take that bait eventually. I'm not exactly sure when, so I don't want to fast forward it. But he does something here soon. And if we look, he is just all in these trees, and he is really trying to hide. Here it is. Here are the Eastern Cataphracts coming out from the right forest. And he's going to start to take massive losses from focused slinger fire. You have to be very careful with your cataphracts or any cavalry unit when engaging skirmishers or slingers, because they can't get out quickly. So he's going to take massive losses. And this Eastern Cataphractian unit hasn't killed a single man, and he's going to be down 20 units. Things like that are how you win battles where you have a massive cavalry disadvantage. You just start to skirmish and pick away at the units he's depending on to win. It's actually how you win any battle with an army like this. And this army is built to skirmish. This is a slow build. It's not a rush build like this guy's is. It's a slow build. And understanding how to use slow builds and rush builds is what will allow you to win in Rome too. I know I have a slow build, and I know I can't engage this guy directly. He is going to wisely start to change directions though and move along this path right here. You see this force? This force is going to start a movement to the right, and his force is going to start a movement to the left. You'll see it in real time here, and he's actually being quite brilliant. Now, this could be dangerous for me. If he gets this force, which contains a Eastern Cataphract, 2 Eastern Cataphracts, and 2 Persian hoplites around over here, I could get surrounded on the right side and start to take quite a few losses from these Eastern Cataphracts. The rest of his force, composed of those Parthian swordsmen mainly, some Peltas, and 2 Eastern Cataphracts, I believe, are over here. Actually, no, 1 Eastern Cataphract is over here and 1 Royal Cataphract is over here, are going to start pushing up to my left. Sorry, his left, my right. And this is my left, his right. Regardless, if he goes up here, and if I turn in this direction, over here, I'm going to get flanked. In other words, if I turn to face this force with my main army, this is going to be the flanking force. If I turn to face this force over here, this flanking force will get through. So there's only one logical response that you can really use to stop a maneuver like this from overtaking you, and that is to back straight up. You do not want to get into the trap of trying to engage this force or that force. You just back straight up. And eventually I'm going to realize this and maneuver back, as you can see here. So maneuvering back, I start to gain distance and gain time to plan my response. He is not moving straight back fast enough. In other words, for him to do the flanking maneuver, he is not going to be able to go fast enough in both directions to capture me. And as you can see, I'm creating space. Well, he is creating space, but I am simply helping him along. This amount of space suddenly means that this flanking force is unprotected and vulnerable to an attack. And I decide later on to engage this enemy flanking force with my cavalry. If I can destroy these 2 Eastern Cataphracts and this flanking force of Persian hoplites, I can engage him directly. But only if I am able to take this force out before this large flanking force reaches me. As you can see, I get engaged over here with his Eastern Cataphracts, his already weakened Eastern Cataphracts, and quickly rout them. And now I'm going to start the process of surrounding. I'm still going to back up from this enemy force over here and set myself up to win the battle with a combination of skirmishing and pike units. Now I'm just going to keep putting my force in between this enemy and this enemy force is what I should do, and that's exactly what I start to do. I reform as quickly as possible and try to take these units out quickly, which I managed to do. How, as you can see though, I did not pull off this maneuver quite as well as I hoped, as I am disorganized. However, with this force routed, he's going to pull out his cavalry support from this side, and he's just going to give up because this force has been completely encircled and destroyed. When you destroy a flanking force like that quickly, that's incredibly helpful for the main engagement. And now, I don't have to worry about that weak flanking force. This is the issue with separating your forces so heavily, is that you can when you bet that much on one side, or you put that many eggs in one basket, you start to see things like this happen, where you get unsupported forces just get wrecked by cavalry. Now I'm going to place my pikemen in between my skirmishers, but he's going to try one last trick. He's going to try to get around my pikemen like this. You see him trying to get around. And he's going to try to actually fake me out with mercenary peltists on the left side and his infantry, such as his hoplites and his swordsmen, on the right side. And I simply counteract this by rotating my pikemen one last time, like so. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to try to tie down my enemy with my cavalry. My incredibly flexible noble horse cavalry are going to slam into his now unprotected mercenary peltists and start taking them out, which is incredibly useful at this point, because I cannot afford to have those peltists throwing their javelins into my pikes. Pikemen are very vulnerable to peltist fire. Now I'm going to make the first aggressive movement that I have been, making in this game. This is the first real point that I'm comfortable with engaging my enemy, and move my pikes up and to engage these Parthian swordsmen before they flank me. Knowing when to push your pikes up is incredibly important, because there is a point where you can become too passive with your pikemen. But anyway, as you can see, my pikemen are going to be able to thrash these Parthian swordsmen from the front, and I'm going to block any cavalry flanking maneuver that my enemy Parthia attempts with my own heavy cavalry. At this point, we can simply enjoy the slaughter. My opponent's forces start to collapse under the combined fire and press of my slingers and my pikes. My pikemen are now fully supported by the weight of my cavalry and the weight of the rocks that the slingers are throwing, and I am going to earn myself a decisive victory. Knowing when to play defensively and aggressively is one of the best skills that you can have in any Total War game. In that case, playing defensively was what won me the battle. Trying to press an opponent with superior cavalry and very mobile infantry with my less than mobile infantry and my technically inferior cavalry was a bad idea. So I compensated by playing very defensively and relying on my incredible skirmishers. I hope you enjoyed this battle, and I hope that it enlightens you to one of the many ways to play the great faction Bactria. And I hope it enlightens you how to play against players that are trying to hide their movements or flank you with two forces crabbing you. So, ladies and gentlemen, I bid you a good night.